Okay, we're back. So the goal for today is to talk about interval notation, and in particular, some of the grammatical errors, syntax errors that I see as students are constructing intervals as their final answers to things like linear inequalities. So let me just briefly summarize what an interval actually is. An interval is just a compact way of representing a region on the number line. So say, for example, that my goal was to represent all the numbers from -2 up to +1. I want to represent all numbers from -2 to +1. So something like 0 would be in here. Something like 1/2 would be in here. Something like 0.347519 would be in here. This is a huge collection of numbers. I want to represent all numbers from -2 to 1, and I've drawn a closed dot to indicate that I would like to include -2 itself. I've drawn an open dot to indicate that I would like to exclude 1 itself. Now, this number line drawing is a big pain, in particular to type into the computer. So interval notation enters as a way to represent this shaded region in a manner that's easier to type. So here's the process. I put a comma for the center of the shaded region. To the left of the comma, I put the number which is on the left border of the region. To the right of the comma, I put the number that's on the right border of the region. And then I will use symbols next to -2, next to 1, to indicate whether those numbers should be included or excluded. I'll put a parenthesis next to 1 to indicate that it should be excluded. And I will put a bracket next to -2 to indicate that it should be included. And so my mnemonic for keeping track of that is that the bracket includes the corners and the parenthesis does not include the corners. All right. In general, brackets, which are these angular shapes here, should be used when the adjacent number, the number next to the bracket, should be included. Whereas parentheses should be used when the adjacent number should be excluded. You don't want to include it. So for example, suppose that I'm trying to convert something like x greater than or equal to 2 to interval notation. If I quickly sketch this on a number line, x could be 2 itself, x is allowed to equal 2, and x is allowed to be anything greater than that. Now, this region doesn't really have a border on the right-hand side. It goes all the way off to positive infinity on the horizon. So I would represent this shaded region, I would represent x greater than or equal to 2 as a comma with 2 on the left, infinity on the right. I would use a bracket to include 2 itself, and I would use a parenthesis to exclude infinity. And the reason is that infinity is not a number. Infinity is more of a concept than it is an actual value. And so we never ever include it in the interval. In general, infinities, either positive or negative infinity, should always be next to parentheses. Always, always. Now, another thing that I tend to see when students are writing intervals is that the numbers in the interval are in a very fixed order. They're in the same order as on the number line. They increase from left to right. Smallest number on left, largest number on right. And in particular, positive infinity, since it's all the way to the right-hand side of the number line, positive infinity should always be on the right. Whereas negative infinity should always be on the left-hand side. Now, the final thing that I tend to see is the inclusion of x itself in the interval notation. But the interval is only meant to include numbers and infinities as its border. The interval should not contain the letter x. So say someone was trying to express the following interval, say it was x is supposed to be less than 2. Here are all the ways that this might be written incorrectly. So let's make this red. Let's make this a nice angry color. Incorrect. One incorrect representation of this interval would be x comma 2. I tend to see this frequently because they will just put x in on the left-hand side and 2 in on the right-hand side. But intervals should not ever contain the letter x. Intervals should only contain numbers and infinities. Okay, so just to make this concrete, let me go ahead and draw all the x's less than 2 on the number line. X could not be 2. X equals 2 is not allowed. So I'll put an open dot there, and I'll shade in everything that's less than that, all the way to the left to negative infinity. So another incorrect representation of this would be something like negative infinity 2 with a bracket next to 2. I cannot have a bracket next to 2 because 2 is supposed to be excluded. Likewise, it would be incorrect for me to have a bracket on negative infinity because a negative infinity can never be included. It would also be incorrect to write something like 2 comma negative infinity because the order is mismatched compared to the number line. Negative infinity must be on the left-hand side. And so here are some examples of typical, I would say, typical incorrect grammatical mistakes that I see when students are working with interval notation. So keep that in mind, be on the lookout.